In the depths of the Colorado Rockies, beneath the charred remains of a forgotten mountain lodge, lies a secret that powerful people have killed to protect. When Marcus Chen, a struggling freelance photographer, seeks shelter from a sudden blizzard, he discovers more than just refuge from the storm. Hidden beneath loose floorboards, he uncovers a cache of classified documents, strange scientific equipment, and a leather-bound journal that chronicles a government experiment so disturbing it was erased from all official records. The lodge didn't burn down in an accident 30 years ago. It was destroyed to bury the truth about what happened there. Now Marcus holds evidence of human experimentation that reaches the highest levels of government, involving mind control research that violated every ethical boundary. As he photographs the documents, he doesn't realize that hidden sensors have already alerted those who thought this secret was buried forever. What Marcus found will either make him rich beyond his dreams or get him killed before sunrise. But what was the real purpose of the experiments conducted in that remote mountain laboratory? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Chen had always believed that desperation sharpened a man's vision, but he never expected it to lead him to this moment. 3 months behind on rent, his camera equipment pawned, except for the old Nikon his father had given him. He'd driven into the Rockies chasing rumors of an abandoned mining town that might yield photographs worth selling to travel magazines. The blizzard struck without warning, transforming the mountain road into a treacherous ribbon of ice. His ancient Honda Civic, already protesting the altitude, began sliding sideways toward a cliff that dropped into darkness. Marcus wrestled the wheel, heart hammering, until he spotted the skeletal remains of a structure through the swirling snow. The lodge squatted against the mountainside like a wounded animal. Fire had consumed most of the roof and upper floors decades ago, leaving blackened timbers reaching toward the sky like arthritic fingers. But the stone foundation remained solid, offering shelter from the storm that howled through the peaks. Marcus grabbed his camera bag and flashlight, then fought his way through knee-deep snow to what remained of the front entrance. The heavy wooden door hung askew on rusted hinges, groaning in the wind. Inside, moonlight filtered through gaps in the collapsed ceiling, illuminating a scene of deliberate destruction. This wasn't random vandalism or natural decay. Someone had systematically torn apart the interior, leaving gouges in the walls where fixtures had been ripped out. Electrical conduits dangled like severed nerves. Even the stone fireplace showed signs of purposeful damage, its hearth scattered with debris. Marcus set up his small camping stove in a corner, protected from the wind, and began exploring with his flashlight. The beam revealed remnants of what had once been an elegant mountain retreat. Fragments of carved woodwork lay scattered among the ash. A crystal chandelier, somehow spared from the flames, hung at a drunken angle from a single chain. As he documented the ruins through his camera lens, Marcus noticed inconsistencies in the destruction pattern. While the main rooms showed evidence of intense fire, certain areas remained oddly untouched. A section of the eastern wall bore scorch marks that formed an almost perfect rectangle, as if something had been mounted there and carefully removed before the fire. The floorboards creaked ominously under his weight as he moved deeper into the structure. In what had probably been a library or study, Marcus discovered something that made him pause. The fire damage here seemed contained, deliberate. Books had been burned in the fireplace, but the shelves themselves were merely smoke-stained. He knelt beside a section of flooring near the back wall where several boards lay loose, apparently pried up and hastily replaced. The wood was newer than the surrounding planks, and gaps between them suggested frequent access. Marcus worked his fingers under the edge of one board and lifted. The beam of his flashlight illuminated a metal container nestled in the space between floor joists. His pulse quickened as he carefully extracted a waterproof case, roughly the size of a briefcase but heavier than expected. The latches opened with sharp clicks that echoed in the ruined room. Inside, wrapped in oiled canvas, lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but perfectly preserved. Beneath it, manila folders contained documents bearing official seals and classifications he'd only seen in movies. Top secret stamps covered nearly every page in red ink that had faded to rust brown. Marcus opened the journal with trembling fingers. The handwriting was precise, feminine, belonging to someone accustomed to detailed record-keeping. The first entry was dated 32 years ago, day 1 of Project Mindbridge. I fear what we're about to undertake here will haunt us all. Dr. Kellerman insists the research is necessary for national security, but the subjects arriving today look so fragile, so trusting. How can we proceed knowing what these procedures might do to their minds? The words sent ice through Marcus's veins that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. He flipped through more pages, his photographer's eye automatically cataloguing details, even as his mind reeled from the implications. Dr. Sarah Whitmore. That was the journal author's name, repeated in signatures throughout the documents. A psychiatrist who had documented what appeared to be systematic human experimentation conducted in this very lodge. The pages detailed procedures involving sensory deprivation, pharmaceutical trials, and something called consciousness mapping that made Marcus's stomach turn. As wind rattled the damaged structure around him, Marcus realized he'd stumbled upon something far more significant than photographs for travel magazines. These documents represented evidence of crimes that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal. The storm raged through the night as Marcus huddled in his makeshift shelter. Unable to sleep, Dr. Whitmore's journal lay open beside him, its revelations growing more disturbing with each page. By the pale light of his camping lantern, he read entries that documented the systematic breaking of human minds in the name of national security. Among the documents, one particular letter stood out. Printed on official government letterhead, it bore the seal of a department Marcus didn't recognize. The authorization was signed by 3 officials, their names partially redacted but still readable enough to reveal positions within the intelligence community. Project Mindbridge is hereby authorized under executive order, classification level Omega-7, Dr. Harold. Kellerman will serve as primary researcher with full discretionary powers regarding subject selection and experimental protocols. All activities conducted under this authorization are deemed matters of national security and are exempt from standard ethical oversight. The date on the authorization preceded Dr. Whitmore's first journal entry by 6 months. Someone had been planning this operation long before the first subjects arrived at the lodge. Marcus photographed every page with his Nikon, the camera's flash illuminating the ghostly ruins around him. As dawn broke through the storm clouds, Marcus discovered that the lodge's dark history extended far beyond what he'd initially found. The building itself had been constructed as something called the Clearwater Mountain Psychiatric Research Facility in the 1960s. According to architectural blueprints he found in another folder, the lodge was purpose-built for isolation and control. The original plans showed features that no ordinary mountain retreat would need. Reinforced doors with external locks, windows designed to prevent egress, rooms with observation panels and sound dampening. Even in its current ruined state, Marcus could identify modifications that had transformed a beautiful mountain lodge into a prison. Dr. Whitmore's entries revealed how the facility operated. Subjects were brought in under various pretenses. Some were told they were participating in sleep studies or treatment for depression. Others, particularly those from psychiatric institutions, were simply transferred without explanation. The youngest subject mentioned in the documents was 14 years old. Tommy doesn't understand why his parents sent him here, Dr. Whitmore had written. He keeps asking when he can go home. Dr. Kellerman says the boy's autism makes him an ideal candidate for consciousness mapping experiments. I find myself wondering if we've crossed a line from which there's no return." Marcus's hands shook as he read about the procedures. Experimental drugs that induced prolonged hallucinations. Sensory deprivation chambers where subjects were left for days. Electroshock treatments administered without anesthesia. The clinical language couldn't disguise the torture that had taken place in these rooms. The financial records showed a web of funding that traced back to shell companies and defense contractors. Millions of dollars had flowed through accounts designed to obscure the true source of the money. The paper trail suggested that Project Mindbridge was just one facility in a larger network of similar operations. As Marcus studied the documents, he began to notice something troubling. Several pages contained what appeared to be modern additions. Sticky notes with recent dates, updated contact information, corrections made in different ink. Someone had been maintaining these records long after the facility supposedly closed. The most chilling discovery came in a folder marked Current Status Reports. These documents were dated within the last 5 years and detailed the systematic elimination of anyone who might pose a threat to the project's secrecy. Former staff members who had developed consciences, journalists who had gotten too close to the truth, family members of subjects who had never stopped asking questions. Dr. Sarah Whitmore's name appeared on this list, along with a death certificate dated 1993. According to the official record, she had died in a car accident while driving through the mountains. But a handwritten note attached to the certificate told a different story. Termination authorized after subject attempted to contact media. Vehicle accident staged successfully. Marcus realized that the woman whose journal he'd been reading had been murdered for trying to expose these crimes. Her final entries, written just days before her death, revealed her plans to smuggle evidence out of the facility and deliver it to a contact at the Washington Post. "If something happens to me," she had written, "I pray that someone will find this record and finish what I started. The truth about what we did here must not be buried with us." As morning light filtered through the damaged roof, Marcus understood that he now possessed the evidence Dr. Whitmore had died trying to reveal. But he also realized that the same forces that had silenced her 3 decades ago were still active. The recent dates on some documents proved that the cover-up was ongoing. The storm had passed, leaving the mountains draped in pristine snow that sparkled in the morning sun. But Marcus felt no peace as he continued examining the documents. Deep within the cache, he discovered a metal box containing what Dr. Whitmore had called subject profile cards. Each card bore a photograph, personal information, and detailed notes about the experiments performed on that individual. The faces staring back at him from those faded photographs haunted Marcus more than any horror film ever could. Here was Tommy, the 14-year-old autistic boy Dr. Whitmore had written about. His school picture showed a gap-toothed smile and trusting eyes. The notes documented how they had systematically destroyed his mind over 18 months of procedures. Margaret Foster, age 67, diagnosed with early-stage dementia. Her family had committed her to what they thought was a progressive treatment facility. Instead, she became subject 47 in experiments designed to accelerate memory loss. The final entry in her file simply read, "Consciousness successfully mapped. Subject expired during procedure." Each card told a similar story of betrayal and suffering. Children whose parents had been told they were receiving cutting-edge therapy. Veterans promised treatment for post-traumatic stress. Elderly patients whose families wanted the best care available. All of them had ended up as test subjects in Dr. Kellerman's laboratory of horrors. Marcus's hands trembled as he photographed each profile card. These weren't just documents anymore. They were memorials to people who had trusted the wrong doctors, whose families had never learned the truth about their disappearance or death. As he worked, his phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus almost ignored it, assuming it was another creditor or his landlord demanding rent. But something made him check the screen. The message came from a number he didn't recognize. "Stop what you're doing and leave the mountain immediately. Your life depends on it. A chill ran down Marcus's spine that had nothing to do with the altitude. He looked around the ruined lodge, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. The morning sun that had seemed so peaceful now felt like a spotlight revealing his position to anyone watching from the surrounding peaks. Another message appeared. "We know you found the documents. Return them and you'll be compensated generously for your discretion." Marcus's mind raced. How could anyone know he was here? He'd told no one about his destination, choosing this remote location precisely because it appeared on no tourist maps. Yet somehow, his discovery had been detected within hours. He examined the metal container more carefully and found his answer. A small electronic device, no larger than a button, was attached to the inside of the lid. It had activated when he opened the case, sending a signal to whoever was monitoring the site. The third message was more direct. "We're sending someone to collect you. Do not attempt to leave." Marcus stuffed the documents and journal into his camera bag, his photographer's instincts taking over. Evidence meant nothing if it never reached the public. He had to find a way off the mountain and get these materials to someone who could expose the truth. As he prepared to leave, Marcus noticed movement on the road below. A black SUV with government plates was winding its way up the mountain path, still 20 minutes away, but closing fast. His ancient Honda Civic sat buried under 2 feet of snow, useless for a quick escape. But Marcus had spent years hiking these mountains with his camera, documenting wildlife and landscapes for outdoor magazines. He knew trails that no vehicle could follow, paths that connected this peak to the town of Cedar Ridge, 12 miles away. He shouldered his pack and began photographing everything he could see of the lodge's layout. If he survived this, others would need to find this place and understand its significance. The camera's memory card became his insurance policy, documenting not just the documents, but the location itself. As the SUV drew closer, Marcus made his decision. He couldn't fight trained government agents, but he could outrun them in terrain he knew better than anyone. The winter gear in his pack, essential for survival photography, would serve him well in the mountains. Before leaving, he sent a single text message to Elena Vasquez, a local historian he'd met while researching the area's mining history. She was the only person he trusted who might understand the significance of what he'd found. "Check your email. If something happens to me, contact the media. The truth needs to come out." Then Marcus Chen, struggling photographer turned reluctant whistleblower, began the most important hike of his life. The final document Marcus discovered before fleeing changed everything. Tucked beneath all the other papers, almost as an afterthought, lay a single sheet of official letterhead marked Emergency Evacuation Protocol. The instructions were chillingly precise. In the event of potential exposure, implement scorched earth procedures. All physical evidence must be eliminated within 72 hours. Staff relocation to predetermined safe houses. Subject disposal according to Protocol 7. No witnesses. The document was signed by the same officials who had authorized Project Mindbridge, but the date was only 18 months old. This wasn't historical record. Someone had updated these procedures recently, which meant the cover-up remained active decades after the lodge's destruction. Protocol 7 was detailed in an attached memo. Marcus's blood ran cold as he read the clinical descriptions of how subjects would be eliminated if the facility faced exposure. The procedures ranged from staged accidents to induced medical emergencies. Each method was designed to appear natural while ensuring permanent silence. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed off the mountain walls. Marcus stuffed the evacuation protocol into his jacket pocket and began his descent down the back slope of the mountain. The trail was treacherous in winter, but he'd photographed wildlife along this route many times. Every fallen log and rocky outcrop was familiar territory. As he picked his way through deep snow, Marcus realized the true magnitude of what he'd stumbled upon. This wasn't just a historical atrocity that someone wanted to keep buried. The recent documents proved that the same people who had authorized these experiments were still in positions of power, still actively protecting their secrets. The evacuation protocol explained how the lodge fire had really started. It wasn't an accident or even an attempt to destroy evidence. The fire had been a controlled burn, designed to eliminate the facility while preserving the hidden cache beneath the floor. Someone had planned to return for those documents when the heat died down, but 30 years had passed, and whoever was responsible had apparently forgotten about their insurance policy. Or perhaps they'd assumed the documents would deteriorate beyond usefulness. Marcus's discovery had caught them completely off guard. The trail descended through a grove of aspen trees, their bare branches creating natural camouflage. Marcus paused to catch his breath and check his phone. No signal, which was both blessing and curse. The government agents couldn't track him electronically, but he also couldn't call for help. Behind him, he heard the distant sound of doors slamming and voices calling out instructions. They'd reached the lodge and discovered his abandoned car. It wouldn't take them long to realize he'd fled on foot. But the fresh snow would make tracking difficult until they brought in specialists. Marcus pressed on, following a creek bed that led toward the main valley. The icy water had carved a natural channel through the mountain, creating a hidden route that would be nearly impossible to follow from above. His photographer's knowledge of the terrain was his only advantage against pursuers with superior resources and training. As he moved, Marcus thought about Dr. Whitmore's final journal entries. She had known they were watching her, known that her attempts to contact the outside world had been detected, yet she'd still hidden these documents, hoping someone would eventually find them and finish what she'd started. The evacuation protocol proved that Dr. Whitmore's murder hadn't been an impulsive decision. It was part of a systematic plan to eliminate anyone who threatened the project's secrecy. The same plan that now targeted Marcus for the crime of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But there was one crucial difference between Dr. Whitmore's situation and his own. She had been working alone, isolated within the facility with no outside allies. Marcus had already contacted Elena Vasquez and sent copies of key documents to her email. Even if they silenced him, the evidence would survive. The realization gave him strength as he pushed through the deepening snow. Every step took him farther from immediate danger and closer to people who could help expose the truth. The subject profile cards in his pack seemed to weigh more than their physical mass, carrying the hopes of victims whose stories had been buried for 3 decades. A helicopter's rotors echoed off the mountain peaks behind him. Marcus didn't look back. He had promises to keep to the dead, and the living still had time to learn the truth about what had happened in that cursed lodge among the Colorado peaks. Marcus had made it 3 miles down the mountain when he discovered he'd been walking into a trap. Hidden among the documents in his pack was something he hadn't noticed before. A small tracking device, no bigger than a credit card, embedded between the pages of Dr. Whitmore's journal. The government agents hadn't just known about his presence at the lodge. They'd been monitoring his exact location since the moment he opened that hidden cache. The device was sophisticated, military-grade technology that could transmit his coordinates in real time to anyone with the proper receiving equipment. Marcus realized with growing horror that his careful escape route had been broadcast to his pursuers every step of the way. They weren't searching for him randomly. They were herding him toward a predetermined location. The creek bed he'd been following opened into a narrow valley where the winter silence felt oppressive. No bird calls, no wind through the trees. Even the water seemed to flow more quietly here. Marcus's photographer instincts, honed by years of capturing wildlife, recognized the unnatural stillness that preceded an ambush. He was about to retreat when a voice called out from the trees ahead. "Mr. Chen, there's no need to run any further. We just want to talk." 3 figures emerged from concealment, dressed in tactical gear, but carrying their weapons in non-threatening positions. The speaker was a woman in her 40s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Her badge identified her as Agent Sarah Morrison, Department of Internal Security. You've stumbled onto something that requires delicate handling. Morrison continued, her tone reasonable but firm. Those documents represent a matter of national security that goes beyond what you might understand. Marcus kept his distance, camera bag clutched protectively against his chest. I understand that people were tortured and murdered in that facility. I understand that someone's been covering it up for 30 years. The Cold War required difficult decisions, Morrison replied. Project Mindbridge was authorized at the highest levels during a time when our nation faced existential threats. Yes, mistakes were made, but exposing those mistakes now would serve no purpose except to damage ongoing national security operations. Ongoing operations. Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. You mean this is still happening? Morrison's expression didn't change, but her silence was answer enough. The second agent, a younger man with dead eyes, shifted impatiently. His hand drifted toward his weapon. We're prepared to offer you substantial compensation for your discretion, Morrison said. Enough to solve your financial problems and set you up comfortably for life. All we need is the return of those documents and your word that this incident never happened. Marcus thought about the subject profile cards in his pack. Tommy's trusting smile. Margaret Foster's grandmother's eyes, Dr. Whitmore's desperate final entries. And if I refuse, then you'll be classified as a security threat, Morrison said simply. People who threaten national security sometimes have accidents. They disappear on mountain hiking trips. They have car crashes on dangerous roads. It's unfortunate but necessary. The third agent had been circling during the conversation, positioning himself to cut off Marcus's retreat. But Marcus had noticed something Morrison hadn't. The tracking device in his pack wasn't just broadcasting his location. It was also recording audio, storing everything in its internal memory. He'd discovered this when he examined the device more closely during his descent. The technology was designed not just for surveillance, but for evidence gathering. Someone else was monitoring this conversation, someone Morrison didn't know about. You're making a mistake, Marcus said, speaking loudly enough for the device to clearly record his words. I've already sent copies of key documents to contacts outside the government. Killing me won't stop the truth from coming out? Morrison's composure cracked slightly. You're bluffing. You've been on that mountain less than 24 hours. There hasn't been time to establish contact with anyone. Elena Vasquez received my email 6 hours ago, Marcus said. She's a local historian who specializes in government cover-ups. If I don't check in with her by sunset, she's been instructed to forward everything to the Washington Post, the New York Times, and CNN simultaneously. It was a lie, but a convincing one. Marcus had indeed contacted Elena, but he'd only sent her a cryptic message asking her to check her email. The documents he'd supposedly transmitted existed only on his camera's memory card, but Morrison didn't know that. Her hand moved to her radio, preparing to contact her superiors for new instructions. In that moment of distraction, Marcus made his move. He'd spotted a game trail leading up the far slope, a route his pursuers wouldn't expect him to take. As he ran, Marcus heard Morrison shouting orders behind him. The recording device in his pack continued capturing everything, including her instructions to implement Protocol 7 immediately. The game trail led Marcus higher into the mountains, away from the valley where Morrison's team was regrouping. His lungs burned in the thin air, but adrenaline kept him moving through snow that reached his knees. Behind him, he could hear the helicopter returning, its rotors echoing off the canyon walls as it began a systematic search pattern. As he climbed, Marcus examined the tracking device more carefully. It wasn't just recording audio and transmitting location data. The device contained an encrypted communication system that was actively intercepting radio transmissions from Morrison's team. Someone else was listening to their conversations, someone the agents didn't know about. The intercepted communications revealed the scope of the operation hunting him. Morrison commanded a 12-person team with access to military resources. They'd established a perimeter around the entire mountain range, blocking all major roads and trails. Local law enforcement had been told to watch for a dangerous fugitive who might be armed and unstable. But the most chilling discovery came in a transmission between Morrison and her superiors. The conversation was partially encrypted, but Marcus could make out enough to understand that he wasn't their only target. Other researchers, journalists, and family members of Project Mindbridge subjects were being neutralized simultaneously across the country. Operation Clean Slate is proceeding on schedule, Morrison reported. All primary targets have been located. Secondary targets are being processed according to Protocol 7. Recommend escalating timeline to contain potential media exposure. The response came from someone Morrison addressed as Director. Authorized. You have 48 hours to eliminate all traces of the Mindbridge files. No loose ends this time. Marcus realized he'd stumbled into something much larger than a simple cover-up. This was a coordinated purge designed to eliminate anyone who might expose Project Mindbridge or its ongoing successor programs. Dr. Whitmore's murder 30 years ago hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic campaign that continued to this day. The encrypted device in his pack suddenly activated, broadcasting a new signal. Marcus ducked behind a boulder as text appeared on its small screen. This is Agent David Park, Internal Affairs Division. If you're receiving this message, you're carrying evidence of illegal government operations. Do not trust local law enforcement. Proceed to coordinates 39.7439, 105.2296. Help is waiting. Marcus checked his GPS. The coordinates were for Cedar Ridge, the mountain town where Elena Vasquez lived. But could he trust this mysterious contact? The device could be part of an elaborate trap designed to lure him into the open. Another transmission provided his answer. Morrison's voice crackled through the device's speakers. We've lost the primary tracking signal. Target may have discovered the device, switching to thermal imaging and expanding search radius. If the agents could no longer track him electronically, then the device was genuinely helping rather than betraying his position. Marcus made his decision and began working his way towards Cedar Ridge, using valleys and tree cover to avoid the helicopter's thermal sensors. As he descended towards civilization, Marcus intercepted more radio chatter that revealed the conspiracy's true scope. Project Mindbridge had been just the beginning. The techniques developed in that mountain laboratory had been refined and expanded into what they now called cognitive restructuring programs. Current facilities operated under the cover of private psychiatric hospitals and veterans treatment centers. Subjects were recruited from populations society had forgotten: homeless veterans, undocumented immigrants, patients with no family connections. The experiments had evolved beyond simple mind control into something far more sinister. Phase 3. Implementation shows promising results, came a report from another location. Subject integration into target populations proceeding smoothly. No adverse reactions detected in the past 6 months. They were creating sleeper agents, Marcus realized. People whose memories and personalities had been systematically rewritten to serve as unconscious operatives. The technology Dr. Whitmore had documented in her journal had been perfected over 3 decades of secret research. The helicopter passed overhead again, its searchlight sweeping the forest below. Marcus pressed himself against a fallen log, grateful for the camouflage his dark winter clothing provided. His camera bag felt heavier with each step, weighed down not just by documents, but by the responsibility to expose crimes that spanned generations. As the lights of Cedar Ridge appeared through the trees below, Marcus wondered if Elena Vasquez was still alive to receive his message. Operation Clean Slate was eliminating anyone connected to Project Mindbridge's history. A local historian who specialized in government secrets would certainly be on their list. Elena Vasquez lived in a converted Victorian mansion that served as both her home and the Cedar Ridge Historical Society. When Marcus finally reached the town's outskirts after a treacherous 6-hour descent, He found her house dark, except for a single light in the basement archive room. It was well past midnight, but Elena was exactly where he'd hoped she'd be, surrounded by boxes of documents and historical records. She answered his knock with a shotgun in her hands, her grey hair pulled back in a practical bun, and her eyes sharp with suspicion. At 62, Elena had the bearing of someone who'd spent decades uncovering secrets that powerful people wanted to keep buried. "Marcus Chen," she said, lowering the weapon after recognizing him. "Your email said to check for documents, but all I found was a cryptic message about truth coming out. Care to explain why you're hiking through a blizzard in the middle of the night?" Marcus stepped inside, grateful for the warmth and relative safety of Elena's archive-filled basement. The walls were lined with filing cabinets and document boxes, the accumulated research of a lifetime spent investigating local mysteries. Her specialty was government cover-ups, involving indigenous land rights and military testing, work that had made her few friends among federal agencies. "I found something at the old Clearwater Lodge," Marcus said, opening his camera bag. "Documents that prove the government was conducting illegal experiments there for years." Elena's expression grew grave as Marcus spread Dr. Whitmore's papers across her research table. She examined each document with the careful attention of a trained historian, noting details that Marcus had missed during his frantic flight from the mountain. "Clearwater Lodge," she said softly. "I've been researching that place for 20 years. The official records claimed it was just a psychiatric retreat that burned down in an electrical fire. But the timing never made sense, and too many people disappeared around the same time." She pulled out a thick folder from her files, revealing newspaper clippings and missing person reports from the early 1990s. "Look at this pattern. 17 people vanished within a 6-month period, all connected to the lodge, either as patients, staff, or family members asking questions. The authorities claimed they were unrelated disappearances. But I knew better. Marcus studied the clippings Elena had collected. Dr. Sarah Whitmore's obituary was there, along with reports about other researchers who had died in suspicious accidents. A journalist from Denver who'd been investigating the lodge had died in a hotel fire. A nurse who'd worked at the facility had supposedly committed suicide, though her family insisted she'd been planning to expose what she'd witnessed. "There's more," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "My grandfather was one of the subjects." She opened a wooden box that contained family photographs and letters. Among them was a picture of a young Navajo man in military uniform, his face bearing the same strong features that Elena had inherited. Joseph Vasquez. My grandfather was a Korean War veteran struggling with what we now call PTSD. In 1978, the VA referred him to Clearwater Lodge for treatment. My family never saw him again. The lodge claimed he'd walked away during a therapy session and gotten lost in the mountains. They found his body weeks later, supposedly from exposure. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she handled the photograph. But my grandmother never believed that story. My grandfather knew these mountains better than anyone. He'd grown up hunting and fishing these peaks. There's no way he would have gotten lost out there. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. "The subject profile cards I found. Was your grandfather's name among them?" Elena nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Joseph Vasquez, subject 23. According to the documents you photographed, they used him to test something called cultural memory extraction. They wanted to understand how traditional indigenous knowledge was stored and transmitted. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. The experiments hadn't just targeted random subjects. They'd specifically sought out people from marginalized communities, people whose disappearances wouldn't generate significant investigation or media attention. "Elena, there's something else you need to know," Marcus said. "The people who conducted these experiments are still active. They're conducting what they call Operation Clean Slate, eliminating anyone who might expose what happened. Your name might be on their list." Elena's expression hardened with a resolve that reminded Marcus of her grandfather's military bearing. "Let them come. I've been waiting 45 years to get justice for my grandfather and all the others. If they want to silence me, they'll have to work for it. She began pulling out additional files, revealing decades of research into government programs targeting indigenous communities. Marcus, what you found isn't just evidence of one illegal operation. It's the missing piece of a puzzle that connects multiple cover-ups spanning half a century. Elena's most devastating evidence came in the form of letters her family had never been allowed to see. Hidden in a sealed envelope marked "Return to D." Sender, she'd discovered correspondence her grandfather had tried to send home. During his final weeks at Clearwater Lodge, "My dearest Maria," one letter began in Joseph's careful handwriting. "They tell me the treatment is helping, but I cannot remember what I had for breakfast this morning. Sometimes I forget your face, though it has been the center of my world for 20 years. The doctors say this is normal, but nothing about this place feels normal to me." Marcus watched Elena's face as she read passages aloud, her voice breaking slightly at the pain her grandfather had tried to hide from his family. The letters revealed a systematic erosion of memory and personality that matched exactly what Dr. Whitmore had documented in her clinical notes. "They show me pictures and ask me to forget them," another letter continued. "Pictures of ceremonies, of sacred places, of the stories my grandmother told me. When I refuse, they give me medicine that makes everything hazy. I try to hold on to our traditions, but they slip away like water through my fingers." The correspondence painted a clear picture of cultural genocide disguised as medical treatment. The researchers weren't just studying memory. They were deliberately erasing the traditional knowledge that connected indigenous people to their heritage. Joseph's letters showed someone fighting desperately to maintain his identity against systematic attempts to destroy it. Elena opened another file containing photographs she'd obtained. Through decades of investigation, black and white images showed the lodge during its operational period, revealing details that the official records had omitted. Security fences topped with razor wire, guard towers disguised as fire watchtowers, vehicles with government plates parked outside what was supposedly a private psychiatric facility. "Look at this," Elena said, pointing to one photograph. "That's my grandfather in the background, barely visible behind a fence. A local newspaper photographer took this picture for a story about the lodge's contribution to veteran care. They had no idea they were documenting a prison." Marcus studied the image through his photographer's eye, noting details that revealed the facility's true nature. The patients visible in the photograph weren't walking freely around the grounds. They were being escorted by staff members who wore what appeared to be security uniforms rather than medical scrubs. The encrypted device in Marcus's pack suddenly activated again, displaying a message from Agent Park. "Morrison's team has surrounded your location. Exit through basement tunnel. Map attached. Elena Vasquez is in extreme danger." Elena looked up from the documents with grim determination. "I've been preparing for this day for 20 years, she said, moving to a bookshelf that concealed a hidden panel. "This house was a stop on the Underground Railroad during the Civil War. The tunnels they used are still intact." She revealed a narrow passage that led into the mountain behind her house. The tunnel was equipped with emergency supplies and communication equipment, evidence of Elena's long-term preparation for exactly this scenario. "How did you know this would happen?" Marcus asked as they gathered the most crucial documents. "Because I've been in contact with other families of Mind Bridge subjects for decades," Eleanor replied. "We've been sharing information, building a network of people seeking justice. 3 of my contacts have died in suspicious accidents in the past year. I knew they were accelerating their cover-up operations." As they prepared to enter the tunnel, Marcus's camera captured one final image of Elena's archive room. Decades of meticulous research, thousands of documents and photographs, all representing one woman's determination to expose the truth about her grandfather's murder. "The financial records you found," Elena said as they moved through the tunnel, "they connect to a foundation that's been funding similar research at other locations. I've traced the money trail to facilities in Arizona, Montana, and Alaska. All of them focus on indigenous communities, all of them disguised as medical or social programs. The tunnel emerged in a grove of trees, half a mile from Elena's house. As they climbed out, Marcus could see the lights of government vehicles surrounding the Historical Society building. Morrison's team was discovering an empty house and a carefully prepared message Elena had left behind. Elena Vasquez has been researching government crimes for 45 years, the note read. If something happens to her, copies of all evidence have been distributed to contacts nationwide. The truth about Clearwater Lodge and Project Mindbridge will be exposed regardless of your actions tonight. It was a bluff. But like Marcus's earlier deception about contacting media outlets, it might buy them precious time to reach safety and allies who could help expose the conspiracy. Elena led Marcus through mountain trails she'd known since childhood, paths that connected her property to an abandoned mining complex 5 miles away. As they hiked through the darkness, she shared the most damning evidence she'd uncovered, financial records that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. 23 facilities across 7 states, Elena explained, her breath creating clouds in the cold air, all funded through a web of shell companies and defense contractors. The Clearwater Foundation, Prometheus Research Institute, Alpine Medical Systems. Different names, same source of money. She pulled a waterproof folder from her pack containing bank records and corporate filings she'd obtained through years of investigation. The documents revealed a financial network designed to obscure the true funding sources for ongoing human experimentation programs. Look at these quarterly reports, Elena said as they rested beside an old mining shaft. They're written in corporate language, but if you know what to look for, they're describing human subjects like laboratory equipment, asset acquisition, processing efficiency, disposal protocols. They've turned people into commodities. Marcus photographed each document by the light of Elena's headlamp. His cameras flash, briefly illuminating the abandoned mining equipment around them. The juxtaposition felt symbolic, one extractive industry replacing another, both leaving communities scarred and broken. The financial trail revealed something that made Marcus's blood run cold. His ex-girlfriend, Sarah Morrison, the investigative journalist he'd hoped to contact for help, had received payments from one of the shell companies. The transfers were disguised as consulting fees, but the timing corresponded exactly with her decision to drop an investigation into missing veterans. Sarah Morrison, Eleanor said, noting Marcus's shocked expression. I tried to warn her 2 years ago when she started looking into disappeared indigenous activists. She stopped returning my calls after that. She's not involved with the cover-up, Marcus said desperately. Sarah's one of the most ethical journalists I know. She wouldn't take money to bury a story. Elena's expression was compassionate but firm. The payments started small, research consulting they called it. Then they increased when she agreed to focus her investigations elsewhere. By the time she realized what was happening, they probably had enough compromising material to destroy her career if she spoke out. The encrypted device activated again with a message from Agent Park. Financial surveillance detected. Your location is compromised. Proceed to coordinates 39.732, 105-1987. Dr. Rebecca Martinez is waiting. She has information about current operations. Elena checked her GPS. That's the old Riverside Medical Center. It's been abandoned for 10 years, since the hospital moved to a new facility. Why would someone be waiting there? Dr. Martinez, Marcus said, recognizing the name from documents they'd found. She was listed as a consulting psychiatrist for 3 of the facilities in your financial records. Maybe she's ready to talk. As they made their way toward the abandoned hospital, Elena revealed the personal cost of her decades-long investigation. I lost my job at the university when I refused to stop researching government programs. Lost most of my friends when they decided I was becoming too obsessed with conspiracy theories. My own children think I'm paranoid because I've spent their inheritance on this research. Why keep going? Marcus asked. Because my grandfather was a decorated veteran who served his country with honor, Helena replied. He deserved better than to die as a lab rat in some government experiment. They all did. The abandoned hospital loomed ahead, its empty windows like dead eyes staring across the valley. Elena's investigation had revealed that this facility had once housed a satellite program connected to Project Mindbridge, specializing in what they called social integration experiments. They brought subjects here after the initial conditioning at places like Clearwater Lodge, Elena explained. The goal was to test whether the modified subjects could function in normal society without detection. Patients were released into the local community with false identities and monitored for behavioral compliance. As they approached the hospital's main entrance, Marcus realized the full horror of what Elena was describing. The researchers hadn't just been conducting isolated experiments. They'd been field testing their subjects in real communities, using innocent civilians as unwitting participants in their studies. The financial records showed that the program was still active. Current expenditures included community integration monitoring and long-term behavioral assessment. Somewhere in America, people were living normal lives without knowing their memories, and personalities had been artificially constructed by government scientists. Dr. Martinez was waiting in the hospital's lobby, a woman in her 50s whose haunted expression suggested she carried terrible knowledge about the programs she'd once served. Dr. Rebecca Martinez carried herself like a woman haunted by her own conscience. Her medical credentials were impressive, but her eyes held the weight of terrible knowledge. As Elena and Marcus entered the abandoned hospital lobby, she emerged from the shadows where she'd been waiting. "Agent Park said you'd found Dr. Whitmore's journal," she said without preamble. "I need to see it. There are things in there that will help you understand what we're really dealing with." Marcus handed over the leather-bound journal, watching as Dr. Martinez opened it to specific pages with the familiarity of someone who'd read these entries before. Her hands trembled slightly as she found what she was looking for. "Here," she said, pointing to an entry dated 3 weeks before Dr. Whitmore's death. She mentions finding a safe deposit box key hidden in her office. "I was the one who told her about it." Elena leaned closer to read the passage aloud. Dr. Martinez revealed that Dr. Kellerman maintains insurance policies against potential exposure. He's documented everything, keeping records that could implicate his superiors if they ever try to make him a scapegoat. "The key is hidden behind his medical license on the wall. I'd been working with Sarah Whitmore to gather evidence," Dr. Martinez explained. "We knew the project was spiraling out of control, and we were planning to expose it together. But when she was killed, I panicked. I've been in hiding ever since, moving between safe houses, watching as they systematically eliminated anyone who might talk." She led them deeper into the hospital, using a flashlight to navigate corridors that had been stripped of equipment and fixtures. In what had once been the psychiatric ward, Dr. Martinez revealed a hidden room where she'd been storing evidence for over 2 decades. The room contained filing cabinets filled with documents, photographs, and most disturbing of all, video recordings. Dr. Martinez activated a battery-powered monitor and inserted a disc labeled Clearwater Lodge, Final Recordings. The grainy footage showed Dr. Whitmore's final days at the facility. In one recording, she was clearly visible hiding documents beneath the lodge's floorboards, confirming that she'd been the one to create the cache Marcus had discovered. But more importantly, the video showed her accessing Dr. Kellerman's safe deposit box and photographing its contents. "Watch this," Dr. Martinez said, fast-forwarding to a section where Dr. Whitmore was examining documents in what appeared to be a bank vault. "These are the insurance files. Dr. Kellerman documented every illegal order he received, every authorization for unethical procedures, every cover-up directive from his superiors." The video showed Dr. Whitmore photographing hundreds of pages, her expression growing more horrified as she realized the full scope of the conspiracy. Names, dates, locations, financial transfers, everything needed to expose the program and identify everyone involved. She copied everything onto microfilm, Dr. Martinez said. But she never had a chance to deliver it to the media contacts she'd arranged. They killed her 3 days after this recording was made. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Where is the microfilm now? Hidden in the same safe deposit box. Dr. Whitmore left the key with me before she died, along with instructions for accessing it if something happened to her. I've been too terrified to retrieve it for 30 years. Dr. Martinez pulled out a small brass key, worn smooth by decades of handling. First National Bank of Denver, box 1247. But here's what you need to understand. The moment we access that box, every alarm in their system will activate. They've been monitoring it electronically since Dr. Whitmore's death, waiting for someone to claim her evidence. Marcus realized they were facing an impossible choice. The microfilm contained everything needed to expose the conspiracy, but retrieving it would immediately reveal their location to Morrison's team. It was a trap that had been waiting 3 decades for someone desperate enough to spring it. There's something else, Dr. Martinez said. The current operations aren't just continuing the old experiments. They've been using the original subjects' children and grandchildren as test subjects. They're studying hereditary factors, trying to understand how trauma and conditioning can be passed between generations. She handed Elena a file containing recent medical records and genetic profiles. Your grandfather's DNA was extensively catalogued. They've been tracking his descendants ever since, including you. Every medical exam you've had, every time you've given blood, they've been monitoring your genetic markers. Eleanor's face went pale as she realized the implications. They've been watching my family for 45 years. Waiting to see if my grandfather's conditioning had hereditary effects. The weight of this revelation settled over them like a shroud. The conspiracy wasn't just about covering up past crimes. It was about ongoing research that treated entire families as multi-generational test subjects. Dr. Martinez led them to a secure room in the hospital's basement where she'd hidden her most explosive evidence. Dr. Whitmore's final video recording. The footage had been discovered years after her death, hidden in a safety deposit box that Dr. Martinez had only recently gained access to through a complex legal arrangement involving Dr. Whitmore's estate. The video showed Dr. Whitmore in her final days, clearly aware that she was being watched and that her time was running out. She spoke directly to the camera with the urgency of someone leaving a last testament. If you're watching this, then I'm probably dead, and they've made it look like an accident, Dr. Whitmore said. What we've done at Clearwater Lodge is beyond criminal. We haven't just violated medical ethics. We've committed crimes against humanity under the guise of national security. The recording revealed details that hadn't appeared in her written journal. Dr. Whitmore described how she'd been recruited for the project with promises of groundbreaking research that would help trauma victims. Instead, she'd discovered a program designed to create human weapons through systematic psychological manipulation. Dr. Kellerman showed me subjects who had been completely reprogrammed, she continued. People whose entire personalities had been erased and replaced with artificial constructs. They could be activated with specific trigger phrases and would carry out instructions without conscious awareness of what they were doing. Eleanor gasped as Dr. Whitmore described her grandfather's case specifically. Subject 23, Joseph Vasquez, was selected because of his military training and his cultural knowledge. They wanted to understand how indigenous spiritual practices might be weaponized for psychological warfare. They broke him systematically, piece by piece, until nothing of the original man remained. The video showed Dr. Whitmore breaking down as she described witnessing her grandfather's final session. They'd succeeded in completely erasing his personality. The man they wheeled out of that room had Joseph's face and body, but his mind belonged to them. He would have done anything they commanded without question or memory. Marcus felt sick as he realized the implications. They didn't kill him because the experiment failed. They killed him because it succeeded. Dr. Martinez nodded grimly. The official cause of death was exposure, but the real cause was disposal. They'd gotten what they needed from him and couldn't risk him being discovered by his family. The video recording continued with Dr. Whitmore's description of the broader program. Clearwater Lodge is just one facility in a network spanning the entire country. Each location specializes in different aspects of the research. Some focus on memory manipulation, others on personality restructuring, still others on what they call cultural programming. She revealed that many of the subjects weren't random selections. They were specifically chosen to represent different ethnic, cultural, and social groups. The researchers wanted to understand how conditioning techniques might work differently across various populations. They're not just creating individual assets, Dr. Whitmore explained. They're developing methods for controlling entire communities. The indigenous subjects like Joseph Vasquez were part of research into suppressing traditional resistance movements. Veterans were studied to understand how military training could be redirected toward domestic targets. The most chilling revelation came in Dr. Whitmore's description of the children who had been brought to the facility. The youngest subjects were selected for long-term studies. They wanted to understand how conditioning applied during critical developmental periods might create more stable and controllable results. Elena's voice was barely audible. How many children? Over the 30 years the program operated, we processed 47 minors, Dr. Whitmore said in the recording. Most were from indigenous communities or military families. All were listed as runaways or missing persons in official records. None of their families ever learned what really happened to them. Dr. Martinez paused the video and pulled out another file. I've been tracking some of those children. The ones who survived the conditioning were released into society with false identities. They're living normal lives now, completely unaware of their true origins. Some have families of their own. She showed them photographs of adults who appeared to be living ordinary lives, a teacher in Oregon, a mechanic in Texas, a nurse in Florida. All had been conditioned as children and placed in carefully monitored situations where their artificial personalities could be studied over decades. The really terrifying part, Dr. Martinez continued, is that their conditioning can still be activated. Somewhere in their minds, the original programming remains dormant. With the right trigger phrases, they could be turned into assets again, without their conscious knowledge. Marcus realized they weren't just dealing with historical crimes. They were looking at an active network of unconscious operatives scattered across the country. People who had no idea they were potential weapons waiting to be activated. The video recording ended with Dr. Whitmore's final words. I pray that someday someone will find this evidence and use it to free the people we've enslaved. They deserve to know who they really are, and the families deserve to know what happened to their loved ones. Dr. Martinez's next revelation shattered any remaining illusions about the scope of the conspiracy. She led them to a locked cabinet containing personnel, files that revealed the moral conflicts within the government agencies. Overseeing Project Mindbridge, not everyone involved was a willing participant, she explained, opening a file labeled Internal Dissent Reports. Some agents and officials tried to blow the whistle over the years. Their stories show just how far the conspiracy reaches and how brutally it maintains its secrecy. The first file belonged to Agent David Park, the same person who had been communicating with Marcus through the encrypted device. His official record showed a decorated career in government service, but his personal notes revealed growing horror at the assignments he'd been given. Agent Park was ordered to conduct surveillance on Project Mindbridge critics in 1995. Dr. Martinez read from his file. His initial reports were professional and thorough. But look at this note he added to his final submission. Marcus read the handwritten addition. I cannot in good conscience continue to monitor American citizens whose only crime is seeking truth about government programs. The activities I've witnessed at Clearwater Lodge and similar facilities represent clear violations of constitutional rights and basic human decency. I formally request reassignment from this operation. The file showed that Park's request had been denied. Instead, his superiors had assigned him to special duties that involved monitoring the surveillance operation itself. He'd become an internal watchdog, tasked with identifying other agents who might be developing moral qualms about their assignments. Park's been walking a tightrope for 30 years, Dr. Martinez explained, publicly loyal to the program while secretly documenting its crimes. He's the source of many of these internal documents. Without his covert assistance, I would never have obtained this evidence. Elena examined another file belonging to Dr. Catherine Hendricks, a CIA psychiatrist who had been assigned to evaluate Project Mindbridge's effectiveness. Her reports painted a picture of someone struggling to reconcile her professional ethics with her patriotic duty. The psychological profiles of conditioning subjects show severe and irreversible trauma, Dr. Hendricks had written. While the program achieves its stated goals of creating compliant assets, the human cost cannot be justified under any reasonable interpretation of medical ethics or constitutional law. Her recommendations for program termination had been ignored, but her detailed documentation of the subject's conditions provided crucial evidence of the systematic torture that had taken place. She'd secretly interviewed dozens of subjects, recording their accounts of the procedures they'd endured. Dr. Hendricks was found dead in her office in 1997, Dr. Martinez said quietly. Officially ruled a suicide, but her family never believed it. She'd been planning to testify before a congressional committee about human rights violations in classified programs. The most damaging evidence came from Agent Rebecca Stone, a FBI liaison who had been assigned to coordinate between Project Mindbridge and domestic law enforcement agencies. Her files revealed how the program had been used to target political dissidents and civil rights activists. They weren't just experimenting on random subjects, Stone had written in a confidential memo. The selection process specifically targeted individuals whose political activities or cultural identities posed perceived threats to government stability. Indigenous rights activists, anti-war protesters, civil rights leaders, anyone whose influence might challenge existing power structures. Marcus felt his understanding of American history shifting as he read Stone's documentation. How many social movements had been undermined by operatives who had been conditioned to serve government interests? How many leaders had been discredited or eliminated through the use of mind-controlled assets? The files showed that Stone had tried to limit the program's domestic applications, arguing that using conditioned subjects against American citizens violated fundamental constitutional principles. Her protests had been noted and filed, but the operations had continued. Agent Stone disappeared during a routine assignment in 2001, Dr. Martinez said. Her body was never found, but her personal effects were discovered in a motel room, along with what appeared to be a suicide note. Her handwriting analysis was inconclusive. Elena's expression grew grim as she realized the pattern. They eliminated anyone who developed a conscience. The only people who survived were those who either fully embraced the program or learned to hide their objections. Dr. Martinez nodded. That's why it's taken so long to gather this evidence. The good people were systematically removed, leaving only true believers and people like Agent Park who learned to play both sides. The encrypted device suddenly activated with an urgent message from Park. Morrison's team has traced your location. They're mobilizing a strike force with orders to eliminate all witnesses. You have less than 2 hours to reach the safe house. Coordinates follow. As they prepared to leave the abandoned hospital, Marcus realized they were no longer just carrying evidence of historical crimes. They were being hunted by the same forces that had been eliminating dissidents for 3 decades. Dr. Martinez's final piece of evidence was the most devastating of all. Actual film footage from the Clearwater Lodge experiments, hidden in a lead-lined container that had protected it from decades of deterioration. She revealed several reels of 16-minute film that Dr. Whitmore had smuggled out of the facility just before her death. Sarah risked everything to get these out, Dr. Martinez said, as she set up an old film projector in the hospital's former conference room. She knew that written documentation could be dismissed as fabrication, but visual evidence would be impossible to deny. The first reel showed the lodge's exterior during its operational period, confirming Elena's historical research about the facility's true nature. Security personnel patrolled the grounds, and high fences topped with razor wire surrounded what was supposedly a civilian medical facility. Government vehicles came and went on a regular schedule, their license plates clearly visible in the footage. But it was the interior footage that provided undeniable proof of the atrocities that had taken place. Dr. Whitmore had used a hidden camera to document procedures that violated every principle of medical ethics and human decency. Marcus watched in horror as the film showed subjects being forcibly restrained while electrodes were attached to their heads. The victims' faces were clearly visible, and their terror was unmistakable. These weren't willing participants in medical research. They were prisoners being tortured in the name of science. Elena broke down completely when the film showed her grandfather. Joseph Vasquez appeared in several sequences, his condition deteriorating visibly over time. In early footage, he retained his dignity and cultural identity, speaking Navajo to comfort other subjects and maintaining his spiritual practices despite the hostile environment. Later sequences showed the systematic destruction of his personality. The proud warrior who had served his country with honor was reduced to a hollow shell, responding only to commands from his captors. His eyes, once bright with intelligence and compassion, became vacant and lifeless. They documented every stage of the process, Dr. Martinez explained, her voice thick with emotion. Dr. Kellerman insisted on maintaining complete records of their methodology. He believed this research would revolutionize psychology and give America decisive advantages in intelligence operations. The film showed other subjects as well, including several of the children whose profile cards Marcus had found. Their treatment was even more brutal than that of the adults, with procedures specifically designed to reshape developing minds. The youngest victims were separated from their families and told they were participating in educational programs that would help them succeed in mainstream society. One sequence showed Tommy, the autistic teenager Dr. Whitmore had written about in her journal. The film captured his transformation from a bright, curious child into a robotically compliant subject who responded only to specific trigger words. His natural behaviors and interests were systematically suppressed until nothing remained of his original personality. The children were Dr. Kellerman's proudest achievements, Dr. Martinez said bitterly. He believed that subjects conditioned during critical developmental periods would be more stable and effective as long-term assets. The film shows his methods for achieving what he called total personality reconstruction. Marcus's photographer training helped him notice details that others might miss. The film showed hidden cameras throughout the facility, suggesting that even more extensive documentation existed. Timestamps revealed that the experiments continued around the clock, with subjects receiving no respite from the systematic assault on their minds. Most disturbing were sequences showing graduation ceremonies, where successfully conditioned subjects were prepared for release into society. These individuals appeared normal and functional, but their responses to certain questions revealed the artificial nature of their personalities. They could recite detailed personal histories that had been implanted during their conditioning, complete with false memories of childhood experiences that had never occurred. Elena's voice was barely a whisper as she watched footage of her grandfather's final session. They turned him into someone else entirely. That's not my grandfather anymore. That's just his body being controlled by their programming. The film's final sequences showed Dr. Whitmore herself, secretly recording her own statements about the program's true purposes. She had realized that the research wasn't limited to creating individual assets. The ultimate goal was to develop techniques for controlling large populations through mass psychological manipulation. Project Mindbridge was just the beginning, she said in the recording. They're planning to apply these techniques on a national scale. Television broadcasts, internet content, educational curricula, everything designed to shape public opinion and behavior according to government specifications. As the film ended, Marcus realized they weren't just documenting historical crimes. They were holding evidence of ongoing psychological warfare against the American people. Techniques that had been refined over decades and were now being deployed through modern media and technology. As they prepared to flee the abandoned hospital, Dr. Martinez handed Marcus a small brass key that would change everything. It was identical to the one she'd shown them earlier, but this one had been hidden in Dr. Whitmore's personal effects for over 30 years. There are 2 safe deposit boxes, she revealed. The one I told you about at First National Bank is the trap they've been monitoring. But Sarah was smarter than they realized. She created a decoy cache to protect the real evidence. Elena examined the key, noting the different bank name engraved on its surface. Rocky Mountain Savings and Loan. That bank closed 15 years ago. Exactly, Dr. Martinez said. When the bank closed, all safe deposit box contents were transferred to a secure storage facility run by the state. It's been sitting there untouched, waiting for someone with the proper documentation to claim it. She pulled out a manila envelope containing legal documents that established her as Dr. Whitmore's designated heir for specific research materials. The paperwork was dated just days before Dr. Whitmore's death, suggesting she had suspected her life was in danger. Sarah left these documents with her attorney, with instructions to deliver them to me if anything happened to her. I only received them 5 years ago when the attorney retired and his successor was settling old cases. Marcus realized the implications immediately. So everything they've been protecting all these years, the evidence they've killed people to suppress, it's all been a decoy. Not entirely, Dr. Martinez clarified. The cache you found at the lodge contains real evidence, as does the monitored safe deposit box. But the most damaging materials, the ones that would definitively prove government involvement and identify specific individuals responsible, those are in the second box, the encrypted device activated with another urgent message from Agent Park. Strike Team ETA 20 minutes. Safe house compromised. New extraction point. Old mining road north of Cedar Ridge. Vehicle waiting. Dr. Martinez began gathering the most crucial documents and film reels, loading them into a waterproof case designed for emergency transport. We can't take everything, but we can save the essentials. The film footage alone is enough to blow this conspiracy wide open. As they made their way through the hospital's lower levels toward an emergency exit, Elena asked the question that had been haunting her since discovering her grandfather's story. How many other families never learned what happened to their loved ones? Based on the records I've seen, at least 300 subjects went through various facilities over the decades, Dr. Martinez replied. Some were returned to their families with false memories about their experiences. Others were told their loved ones had died in accidents or from medical complications. Many simply disappeared into the program permanently. The emergency exit led to a loading dock where they could access the mountain trails without being seen from the main road. As they prepared to leave, Marcus made a decision that would define the rest of his life. I'm going to publish everything, he said. Not just as a news story, but as a complete archive. Every document, every photograph, every frame of film. I want the families of those victims to know what really happened. Eleanor's expression mixed grief and determination. My grandfather's story needs to be told. All their stories do, but we have to survive long enough to tell them. The sound of approaching helicopters echoed through the valley below. Morrison's strike team was closing in, but they still had a narrow window of opportunity to reach Agent Park's extraction point. As they began climbing toward the old mining road, Dr. Martinez revealed one final secret that changed Marcus's understanding of his own situation. "The reason you found that cache isn't entirely coincidental," she said. "Agent Park has been monitoring weather patterns and trail conditions, waiting for the right opportunity to guide someone to that evidence." "You mean he led me there?" "Not directly. But he knew that persistent hikers and photographers sometimes explored that area during winter storms. The tracking device was programmed to activate only if someone discovered the cache during specific weather conditions that would provide natural cover for an escape." Marcus realized he'd been part of a carefully orchestrated plan that had been 30 years in the making. Dr. Whitmore's evidence had been waiting for exactly the right person to find it. Someone with the skills to document it properly and the motivation to risk everything for the truth. The key to the second safe deposit box represented more than additional evidence. It was Dr. Whitmore's final gambit, a masterstroke that had taken 3 decades to reach fruition. The extraction point was a nightmare scenario that redefined everything Marcus thought he knew about the conspiracy. Agent Park was waiting at the old mining road, but he wasn't alone. Standing beside his government vehicle was Agent Morrison herself, her weapon holstered, but her hand resting casually on its grip. "Mr. Chen," she called out as they approached. "Agent Park has been sharing some very interesting information with me." "It seems we've all been operating under false assumptions." Marcus kept his distance, unsure whether Park had betrayed them or if this was some elaborate trap. Elena positioned herself behind a fallen tree, her own hunting rifle ready despite the overwhelming odds they faced. "Show them the document," Park said to Morrison, his voice carrying an authority that surprised Marcus. "Show them what we discovered 6 hours ago." Morrison pulled out a contemporary government memo, its classification stamps and official seals clearly visible even in the dim light. The document bore yesterday's date and was signed by officials whose names Marcus recognized from Eleanor's financial research. "Executive Order 13823, Morrison read aloud. "Emergency termination of Operation Clean Slate due to security breach and potential public exposure. All assets are to be recalled immediately. All personnel involved in current suppression activities are to be debriefed and reassigned. This order supersedes all previous authorizations." Marcus felt his understanding of the situation shift dramatically. "You mean the cover-up has been called off?" "Not called off," Park corrected. "Evolved." The people at the top realized that Operation Clean Slate was creating more problems than it solved. Every person they eliminated left evidence trails that led to more investigations. "We were caught in an escalating cycle of exposure and suppression." Morrison's expression was grim as she continued reading from the memo. "The decision has been made to implement Protocol Omega, full disclosure under controlled circumstances. All Project Mindbridge documentation will be declassified and released through official channels. With government cooperation in congressional investigations and victim compensation programs." Elena emerged from her concealment, her rifle lowered, but her expression skeptical. "Why should we believe this isn't just another trick to get us to surrender the evidence?" Park activated his encrypted device and showed them real-time communications between various government agencies. The messages revealed a massive bureaucratic upheaval as decades-old operations were being rapidly shut down and personnel reassigned. 3 things happened simultaneously, Park explained. First, our surveillance detected at least 12 independent investigations into Project Mindbridge that were progressing faster than we could suppress them. Second, several other countries were preparing to release their own documentation about similar American programs. Third, and most importantly, some of the original conditioned subjects began spontaneously recovering their suppressed memories. Dr. Martinez stepped forward, her medical training evident in her immediate understanding of the implications. Spontaneous recovery? That's not supposed to be possible. The conditioning was designed to be permanent. The human mind is more resilient than Dr. Kellerman realized, Morrison said. After 30 to 40 years, some subjects have begun experiencing memory fragments from before their conditioning. They're remembering their original identities and seeking answers about their lost lives. Park showed them photographs of recent incidents. A teacher in Oregon who had suddenly remembered being a kidnapped child. A mechanic in Texas who began speaking a native language he'd supposedly never learned. A nurse in Florida who started experiencing flashbacks of medical procedures performed on her as a teenager. We're facing a situation where dozens of conditioned subjects might simultaneously recover their memories and realize what was done to them, Park continued. The potential for lawsuits, criminal prosecutions, and international condemnation made continued suppression impossible. Marcus realized they were witnessing a controlled demolition of the conspiracy. Rather than risk complete exposure through multiple independent revelations, the government was choosing to manage the disclosure process themselves. But there's a catch, Morrison said, her tone becoming more serious. Protocol Omega requires complete cooperation from all parties currently in possession of classified materials. That means you need to work with us to ensure the evidence is presented accurately and constructively. Elena's voice carried decades of pain and frustration. You want us to help you. Control the narrative about what you did to our families. We want to ensure that the victims receive justice and compensation, Park replied. But if the evidence is released in an uncontrolled manner, it could destabilize intelligence operations worldwide and endanger other people who had nothing to do with Project Mindbridge. The choice they faced was stark. Cooperate with a controlled disclosure that might limit accountability or risk everything on independent exposure that could be dismissed or suppressed through other means. As helicopter searchlights swept the valley below, Marcus realized that the government's new strategy might be more dangerous than the old one. Instead of silencing witnesses, they were attempting to co-opt them. The true scope of the conspiracy became clear when Agent Park led them to a secure facility hidden beneath the abandoned mining complex. The underground installation had been monitoring not just Project Mindbridge survivors, but active operations at 7 current facilities across the United States. Protocol Omega isn't just about managing historical disclosure, Park revealed as they descended through reinforced tunnels. It's about shutting down ongoing programs that have been operating continuously since the 1970s. The main operations center contained banks of computers displaying real-time surveillance data from facilities in Arizona, Montana, Alaska, and 4 other states. Each location was processing what the screen labels identified as contemporary subjects, using refined versions of the techniques developed at Clearwater Lodge. Marcus felt sick as he studied the monitors showing current operations. The victims weren't historical casualties from decades past. They were people being subjected to the same horrors right now in facilities disguised as mental health centers and veterans' hospitals. How many current subjects? Elena asked, her voice barely controlled. Agent Morrison consulted a classified tablet. Across all active facilities, approximately 230 individuals are currently undergoing various stages of conditioning. Most are unaware they're participants in classified research programs. Dr. Martinez moved to a computer terminal displaying medical records for current subjects. The profiles were horrifyingly similar to those Marcus had found at the lodge. Veterans with PTSD, indigenous activists, homeless individuals, people whose disappearances wouldn't generate significant investigation. These facilities are processing subjects for what they call the Social Stability Initiative, Morrison explained. The goal isn't just individual conditioning anymore. They're creating networks of unconscious operatives embedded in communities across America. Park activated a wall display showing a map of the United States dotted with thousands of markers. Each green dot represents a successfully conditioned subject living in normal society. They maintain regular jobs, families, social connections. Most have no idea their memories and personalities have been artificially constructed. The scale was staggering. Marcus counted over 3,000 active markers, representing people who had been processed through various facilities and released into American communities with false identities and implanted directives. The brown dots represent subjects, currently being monitored for potential memory recovery, Morrison continued. The red dots are recent spontaneous memory incidents that threaten to expose the entire network. Elena studied the map with growing horror. You've turned ordinary Americans into an army of unconscious spies. Not spies, Park corrected. Social influences. Each conditioned subject is programmed to subtly guide community opinion and behavior in directions that support government policy objectives. They promote political candidates, discourage certain types of activism, and report on potentially subversive activities in their areas. The facility's records revealed how the program had evolved since Dr. Whitmore's time. Modern conditioning techniques were more sophisticated, creating subjects who genuinely believed in their artificial personalities and life histories. The programming was designed to integrate seamlessly with natural psychological development, making detection nearly impossible. The current crisis began when subjects in 3 different states simultaneously started experiencing memory recovery, Morrison explained. They began comparing their experiences and realized their implanted histories contained identical elements that couldn't be coincidental. Dr. Martinez pulled up case files for the affected subjects. Look at this pattern. All 3 subjects remembered the same traumatic conditioning procedures, the same facility layouts, even the same staff members. Their false memory implants were created from the same template. Marcus realized the magnitude of what they were dealing with. How do you deprogram 3,000 people who don't know they've been programmed? That's the real purpose of Protocol Omega, Park said. We need to shut down the active facilities immediately and begin developing deprogramming protocols for affected subjects. But we also need to do it in a way that doesn't cause mass psychological trauma or social instability. The coordinates Agent Park had provided earlier led to this facility because it contained something that would change everything. A complete archive of current facility locations, staff identities, and subject profiles. More importantly, it held the technical specifications for reversing the conditioning process. Dr. Kellerman documented everything, Morrison said, leading them to a vault containing thousands of files, including detailed procedures for undoing the psychological modifications he'd created. He knew that someday the program might need to be shut down safely. Eleanor's voice carried a mixture of hope and anger. You mean there's a way to give these people back their real lives? For some of them, Dr. Martinez said, studying the deprogramming protocols. But the process is complex and dangerous. Some subjects have been conditioned for so long that their original personalities may be irretrievably lost. As Marcus documented the facility's evidence with his camera, he realized they weren't just exposing historical crimes anymore. They were uncovering an active operation that had turned American citizens into unwitting weapons against their own democracy. The final confrontation took place not in a dramatic shootout, but in a secure conference room where Marcus, Elena, and Dr. Martinez faced the architects of a conspiracy that had spanned half a century. Director Charles Hartwell, the man who had authorized Operation Clean Slate, sat across from them with the weary resignation of someone whose life's work was crumbling around him. You have to understand the context, Hartwell said, his voice carrying the weight of decades in intelligence work. Project Mindbridge began during the Cold War, when the survival of American democracy seemed to hang by a thread. Soviet psychological warfare programs were far ahead of ours. We believed we had no choice but to develop countermeasures. Agent Park placed a comprehensive evidence archive on the table between them. The master collection contained everything: Dr. Whitmore's original documents, the film footage, financial records, current facility locations, and the technical specifications for deprogramming procedures. The choice now is simple, Park said. Full disclosure through congressional hearings and criminal prosecutions, or managed shutdown with victim compensation and guaranteed prosecution immunity for witnesses who cooperate. Elena's voice carried 45 years of pain and anger. My grandfather died believing he was helping his country. Instead, you turned him into a laboratory rat and murdered him when you were done. No amount of money can compensate for that betrayal. Director Hartwell's expression showed genuine remorse, but his response revealed the complex calculations that had driven the program for decades. Joseph Vasquez was a hero who made the ultimate sacrifice for national security. The techniques developed through his case have prevented countless terrorist attacks and foreign intelligence penetrations. Marcus documented every moment of the confrontation with his camera, understanding that this footage would be crucial for the historical record. The images showed not monsters, but ordinary people who had gradually lost their moral bearings in service to what they believed was a greater good. Dr. Martinez placed the deprogramming protocols on the table. These procedures can potentially restore the original personalities of current subjects, but the process requires immediate implementation. Every day we delay increases the risk of permanent psychological damage. The negotiations that followed revealed the true scope of what they were dealing with. The government was prepared to declassify decades of illegal operations, provide full financial compensation to victims and their families, and implement comprehensive deprogramming programs for current subjects. In exchange, they wanted control over the disclosure, a timeline to prevent panic and protect ongoing legitimate intelligence operations. Were prepared to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission with full subpoena power, Director Hartwell offered. Every victim's family will receive complete documentation about what happened to their loved ones. Every current subject will receive the medical treatment needed to restore their original identity, but Eleanor had conditions that went beyond personal justice. The current facilities shut down immediately. All staff involved in illegal operations prosecuted under domestic law, and a memorial established at the Clearwater Lodge site, honoring the victims and ensuring this never happens again. The final agreement combined elements of justice and pragmatism that satisfied no one completely, but offered the best possible outcome for the victims. The government would implement immediate facility shutdowns, provide unlimited medical care for deprogramming procedures, and establish a billion-dollar compensation fund for victims and their families. Marcus's role in the resolution was unique. As the photographer who had documented the entire conspiracy from discovery to exposure, he would serve as the official historian for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. His images and testimony would ensure that the complete story reached the public without government censorship or manipulation. The last scene showed Marcus standing in the ruins of Clearwater Lodge 6 months later. The site had been transformed into a memorial park where families could honor loved ones who had been victims of the program. Elena served as the memorial's director, using her decades of research to help other families understand what had happened to their relatives. Dr. Martinez had returned to medical practice, but now she worked exclusively with deprogramming patients. Her expertise was crucial in helping conditioned subjects recover their original identities and integrate their traumatic experiences into coherent life narratives. Agent Park had been promoted to head the new Psychological Crimes Investigation Unit, tasked with ensuring that similar programs could never operate in secret again. His 30 years of walking between loyalty and conscience had prepared him perfectly for the role of institutional watchdog. The memorial centerpiece was a wall containing photographs and names of all known victims, including Joseph Vasquez. Elena stood before her grandfather's image each morning, finally able to tell him that his story had been heard and that justice had been served, however, imperfectly. Marcus's camera captured it all. the families reuniting with loved ones whose memories had been restored, the trials of officials who had authorized illegal operations, and the slow process of a nation coming to terms with the crimes committed in its name. The poor hiker who had sought shelter from a storm had become the catalyst for the most significant intelligence scandal in American history. His photographs would ensure that the victims of Project Mindbridge were never forgotten, and that their sacrifice had meaning for future generations who would inherit a more accountable democracy.